A two-wheeled chariot has been found inside a grave that remained hidden for about 2,500 years. It was not discovered in Egypt. It was not buried with a Roman emperor. It lay beneath a hillside on Italy's Adriatic coast, beside the body of a man surrounded by a helmet, an axe, weapons, and vessels still holding organic remains that may come from a funeral feast. Archaeologists believe he belonged to the ruling elite of a mysterious people who lived in Italy before Rome controlled the peninsula. They have called him a warrior prince, but the chariot was only the beginning. Around his tomb was a circular boundary unlike anything archaeologists had previously found in the cemeteries of his culture. Beside him lay an elite woman dressed in clothing fastened with metal pins, wearing decorated footwear, with a large amber set fastener near her head. Nearby were other princely burials, including a warrior with a sword and a rare folding seat linked to power, and the famous tomb of a woman buried with 2 chariots and 2 mules. This was not one rich grave standing alone. It was an entire aristocratic burial ground. And for the first time, archaeologists may be seeing how a forgotten ruling family built its power, displayed its wealth, and prepared its dead for the journey beyond life. The discovery was made near Sirolo, a small town overlooking the Adriatic Sea in eastern Italy. Today, the area is known for beaches, green hills, and the slopes of Monte Canero. In the 6th century BC, it belonged to the world of the Piceni. The Piceni lived in central Italy before Roman expansion transformed the region. They traded across the Adriatic, buried warriors with weapons, and placed elaborate jewelry with elite women. But they left few written records explaining their society in their own words. Much of what is known about them comes from the objects they placed underground. If discoveries that reveal civilizations almost erased from history are why you are here, subscribe and turn on notifications. Because this grave did not simply contain a dead man. It contained a carefully constructed image of power. The new complex was found during preventive archaeological investigations carried out by Italy's cultural heritage authorities and the company Archaeolab. The work took place close to the Piceni necropolis, an area already famous for wealthy Piceni burials. The excavation exposed rows of post holes, forming a wide circle. The wooden posts had vanished long ago. Only their impressions remained in the soil. Yet their arrangement showed that a circular palisade once surrounded the burial ground. This was immediately unusual. Large Piceni funerary monuments in the Canero region were normally marked by ring-shaped ditches. Those ditches separated the space of the living from the space reserved for the dead. Here, there was no surrounding ditch. The boundary had been built from timber. A wall of upright posts may once have enclosed the sacred space. The circle stood on a slight natural rise. Anyone approaching it would have understood that this was not an ordinary cemetery. It was a monument. At the bottom of several post holes, archaeologists found small deposits of selected pottery fragments. The pieces may have been placed when the palisade was built. They could represent foundation offerings or part of a ceremony marking the creation of the burial ground. Their exact meaning remains uncertain, but their repeated placement suggests the boundary was more than practical construction. At its center was the large male burial. Inside the grave were the remains of a curus, a 2-wheeled chariot, probably placed intact into the burial pit. The wood had decayed. Fragments and traces of the vehicle's form survived. This was not a farm cart left by accident. In pre-Roman Italy, a chariot was one of the clearest signs of elite rank. It required skilled craftsmen, valuable fittings, animals, and constant maintenance. Most people could never own one. To bury a chariot meant removing an expensive object from the living world and giving it permanently to the dead. The vehicle may have been used in ceremonies, processions, travel, or warfare. The excavation has not yet proved exactly how it was used during the man's life. But inside the tomb, its purpose was clear. It announced that the person buried beside it was not ordinary. The man was also accompanied by a helmet, an axe, and other offensive weapons. These objects created the image of a warrior. But weapons inside a tomb do not always provide a simple biography. A sword does not prove every owner died in battle. A helmet can be both equipment and symbol. An axe can represent violence, authority, ritual, or all three. The burial presented the dead man as someone who possessed the right to command force. Whether he was a military leader, a local ruler, or a member of a hereditary elite is still being studied. That is why the phrase, warrior prince, must be treated carefully. No inscription has revealed his name. No crown identified his title. Archaeologists use the term because of the scale of the tomb, the chariot, the weapons, and the extraordinary objects around him. His rank is visible. His exact position is not. Then the excavation revealed something more intimate. Large bronze vessels had been placed inside the tomb. They were closed with ceramic lids. After 2,500 years, some still contained organic material, pottery fragments, and animal bones. These may be the remains of a banquet held during the funeral. The living could have gathered around the grave, eaten together, and placed part of the meal beside the dead, or the containers may have held food intended to accompany him into the afterlife. Both possibilities connect the burial to a final act of sharing. A funeral banquet was not only about feeding people. It could unite families, confirm alliances, and show the wealth of those paying for the ceremony. Long after the food disappeared, the vessels remained. The animal bones and organic traces may reveal what was eaten, and whether similar foods were placed in other elite tombs. For archaeologists, the final meal may speak almost as clearly as the weapons. Next to the central tomb was the burial of a woman. Her grave preserved evidence that usually disappears. Fragments of textiles remained. Parts of decorated footwear survived, with metal elements still in their original positions. Numerous fibulae were found directly across her body. Fibulae were metal fasteners, similar in purpose to large safety pins. They held together clothing, and the shroud wrapped around the deceased. Their positions across her chest, shoulders, pelvis, and feet allow archaeologists to begin reconstructing how she was dressed. Beyond her head lay a much larger fibula, built around a piece of amber. It may have belonged to a headdress or an elaborate hairstyle. Amber could travel across great distances through exchange networks linking northern Europe and the Mediterranean. Placed near the woman's head, it would have drawn attention to her status. But who was she? A wife? A sister? A mother? A ruler in her own right? The position beside the central male burial suggests a close connection, but the relationship has not been proven. DNA analysis may eventually reveal whether they were biologically related. Study of the bones may provide their ages, health, diet, and places of origin. For now, the objects show that female prestige was expressed differently from male prestige, but not less carefully. Together, they formed the center of a larger aristocratic group. That larger group is what makes the discovery exceptional. In 2020, archaeologists found another warrior's tomb nearby. He had lived during the second half of the 6th century BC. His weapons included a helmet, spear, longsword, and dagger. He was also buried with a refined bronze jug made in a Greek Etruscan tradition. But the strangest object was a rare folding stool known as a diphros. This was not ordinary furniture. Across the ancient Mediterranean, folding seats could act as symbols of command or elevated status. The stool suggested that the dead man was not valued only because he could fight. He may also have held the right to sit in authority. At the time, that grave appeared to be an extraordinary individual discovery. The new excavation changed its meaning. The 2020 warrior was not isolated. He belonged to a wider cemetery, organized around the central Chariot burial. Individual graves were part of a designed landscape. Their positions may reflect rank, family relationships, or political roles. The cemetery was arranged like a map of authority. Close to this new complex lies another famous burial, known as the Queen's Tomb. Discovered in 1989, it contained an elite Piceni woman, buried with 2 chariots, 2 mules, and a large collection of possessions. Her grave had already shown that women could occupy extraordinary positions in Piceni society. Now the newly discovered female burial and the central warrior prince add more pieces to that picture. The people buried here were not simply wealthy individuals. They belonged to a ruling class that repeatedly used chariots, weapons, imported objects, amber, clothing, animals, and monumental graves to display power. Archaeologist Stefano Finocchi described the new discovery as the first opportunity to observe an entire aristocratic nucleus, rather than one isolated tomb. That distinction matters. A single rich burial can reveal one person. A group of connected elite burials can reveal a political system. It can show who stood at the center and how power passed from one generation to another. The cemetery may preserve the structure of a ruling family whose names have disappeared. The Piceni lived in a world of competing communities, long before Rome united Italy under one political system. Power had to be seen. A leader rode in a chariot. A warrior carried rare weapons. An elite woman wore amber and metalwork, obtained through distant exchange. A funeral gathered the community and turned those symbols into memory. The dead body could no longer command anyone. The tomb commanded on its behalf. That may explain why the burial ground was placed on raised land. It was meant to dominate the surrounding funerary landscape. The wooden palisade defined a sacred circle. The central chariot marked the highest rank. The nearby burials created a hierarchy around it. Even people who never entered the graves would have seen the monument above ground. They would have watched the procession and heard animals and wheels approaching. Then the grave would close. The chariot, weapons, clothing, and vessels would disappear beneath the earth. Why bury the objects that proved a family's power? Because removing them from use could make the sacrifice more impressive. The family was showing that it possessed enough wealth to surrender a chariot, bronze vessels, weapons, amber, and decorated clothing forever. The grave became a vault of prestige that could never be used by a rival. But the discovery does not answer every question. The chariot survives only through its remains and fittings. It is not a complete vehicle, ready to roll from the ground. The man's title is unknown. The woman's relationship to him is unknown. The contents of the bronze vessels are still being analyzed. Some artifacts remain under restoration, and the wider limits of the cemetery are not yet fully mapped. Geophysical surveys suggest that the burial ground may extend beyond the excavated area. More graves could remain beneath the surrounding land. Those burials may reveal children, servants, warriors, relatives, or rivals. They may show whether this aristocratic group controlled the area for decades or generations. They may even contain inscriptions that return names to people, now known only through their possessions. For the moment, the clearest voice belongs to the chariot. 2,500 years ago, it entered the grave with a man powerful enough to take it out of the world of the living. The wooden frame collapsed. The people who watched its burial vanished. Rome rose, conquered Italy, and became an empire. The Piceni were absorbed into a larger history until their rulers became almost invisible. But beneath a hill overlooking the Adriatic, the shape of their power remained. A helmet in the soil, an axe beside the dead. A sealed vessel holding the remains of a final feast. Amber lying beyond a woman's head, and the broken outline of a chariot that carried a forgotten prince into the earth. The next investigation is waiting on screen now.